Leadership is a form of time travel. And what that means is that we are, as leaders, envisioning some kind of future state, a future condition, the achievement of a goal, completing something down the road at some point in the future that is not complete today, right? So as a leader, you recognize that you have a responsibility to help get your people to that future state with you. And you do that through communication, you do that through motivation strategies, being organized, having clarity in your message, having confidence in your ability as a leader to communicate that message and bring people along with you to that future state. So in the act of leadership, or in the exercise of leadership skills, your number one priority is, number one, to envision that future state. Like I said, it may involve setting goals, right? Which is really important. Talking with people about those goals so that there's buy-in. But it's all about the future and then creating the conditions that gets your team to that future point. Now, you may not get everything that you want, right? We have to be adults and understand that we can't make everything happen that we want to happen. But if we set goals and we're bold about it and we plan and we're thoughtful, we'll be able to get most of what we want, even under pretty challenging circumstances. So that's leadership. Management, as best I can tell, is different from leadership because in management, you're dealing with the right now. You're managing right now. You're managing the things that you have to deal with today, in this moment. Approving people's vacation requests, right? Making certain purchases, taking care of certain paperwork, scheduling things right now. So management is very much in the present moment. So I would say that leadership sort of occurs on a time continuum that stretches between this present moment and some point in the future that we envision, but management happens right now. So there's two very different competencies. So if we say that some people are effective managers, but not very effective leaders, or some people are very effective leaders and not very good managers, that is very true. And that's something that you experience as a professional coach when you're working with people one-on-one. You can kind of tell what their leadership capabilities are and what their managerial capabilities are. Some people have a nice balance up between the two. Some people don't, and that's okay. If they don't have the balance, or if you don't have the balance, that's okay. You can work with what you have, but it's important to embrace what you have and not try to be somebody that you're not. Because one of the ways to lose the loyalty of a team is to act like somebody that you're not, because then you lose your credibility and then you become difficult to trust. And quite honestly, what happens is you struggle to trust yourself. So you want to work within the capabilities that you have, which is something that we're going to be spending a lot of time on, particularly on the third day. Okay, does that make sense? So I know that over the course of my professional career, when I spent 13 years in positions of high level, what we would describe as executive management. Now, the difference between supervisory management and executive management is that supervisors manage work, executives manage strategy. It's a different kind of a competency, sort of like management on steroids. If you were to go back and you were to talk to the people that used to work with me, the members of my team, the people that reported to me, and you asked them about John Collins and the way that he did his work and ran his team, what they would probably tell you was that I was a really effective leader and I was an okay manager. And I was very aware of that, by the way. And I was okay with that. And so what I like to do is I like to lean on people that had abilities that I was lacking. And that's how I filled in that gap. Now, I could have fooled myself, right? Because as human beings, we have a remarkable ability to believe things because it's easier or more enjoyable to believe. it would have been enjoyable for me to believe that I was a rock star manager and a rock star leader. But what that would have done is it would have set me up for failure, because in that state of arrogance, I would not have had the presence of mind to fill in the gaps. But by being realistic with myself, knowing what my strengths and weaknesses were, relying on the strengths that other people had that I didn't have, you can fill in those gaps and you can become a more complete administrator, right? And we would describe an administrator as having both leadership competencies and managerial, or leadership responsibilities and managerial responsibilities. So to build on that, we have to confront a really difficult reality. And we're going to blame Mother Nature on this. I want you to look carefully at that number on the screen, 10%. This is the percentage of human beings in the population at large, according to some really fascinating research that was done by Gallup back around 2015. This is the percentage of individuals on average in the human population that have what we might describe as a naturally high capacity for being an effective leader. It's like, oh man, that's not good for the home team, right? That's sort of alarming when you think about it, and you think about the challenges that we have in the world, how complicated the world is getting, the advances that are happening in technology, the gravity of the problems that we face, and also, to look at it more positively, the opportunities that we could take advantage of as a species, as communities, as neighborhoods, right, as organizations, if we had the best possible leadership we could have. So this idea that only 10% of us have a naturally high capacity for leadership is problematic. Or at least for people to have what I like to describe the experience of personal autonomy. I want you to reflect on that phrase, the experience of personal autonomy. Because in the absence of the experience of personal autonomy, you never get the chance to test your leadership abilities and to develop those abilities. So the reason that you had the experience that you had, I would argue, is because your command structure was very effective, because we know this about the Navy and about the military, is very, very effective at creating the conditions in which those competencies start to emerge. So they almost kind of get pulled out of you. So if you are one of the 10%, then you're going to develop faster. Okay? But you are right. And this is a point that I'm going to make, is that this number doesn't mean a whole lot. Okay? But we're going to talk about how you get around the fact that maybe every single one of us in this room is actually in the 90%, that we don't have, or we weren't born with these innate natural leadership abilities. Okay, so we're going to build on that. What this suggests is that on average, or the vast majority of the time, or across most of the population, that leadership does not come naturally to people. That's sort of what this is saying to us. It doesn't come naturally, which means your point becomes really relevant. We got to develop it. Okay? So what does come naturally then? This is critical for us to understand. If leadership doesn't come naturally, then what does come naturally? Well, what does come naturally, and what Mother Nature demands of us, is hierarchy. Hierarchy comes naturally. I talk about this in New Superior at length. In fact, it's really the subject that inspired the New Superior. We are very good at structuring and organizing ourselves so that we can survive. So even if you look at trees in a forest, right? The trees in the forest are competing with each other for sunlight, for space in the soil, for water. right? And so the healthiest trees are going to grow and they're going to crowd out the weaker trees. And so what you will end up with is a forest full of healthy trees. The weaker trees can't compete and they die off. That's what hierarchy does. Hierarchy ensures survival. That's why we have hierarchy in organizations, because in the absence of hierarchy, or with the lack of organization, without identifying who people's roles are, how communication is supposed to flow, who is allowed to make what decisions, in the absence of that hierarchy or organization, we are very vulnerable to threats. So hierarchy has value. It has a lot of value. Now here's the thing, and this is why we're in this class. When we talked a moment ago about the trees in the forest, well, guess what's not important to the trees? Teamwork. The trees are not working with each other. The tree right here isn't looking at the tree over there and going, gosh, I really wish I could do something to help that tree be a little bit more effective in its growth. There's no trees that are standing there going, let's work together. Okay, let's share the water. Okay, we've only got so much soil. It's been cloudy the last 3 days. Come on, everybody. Let's work together here. The trees don't give a rip about teamwork, and because teamwork doesn't matter, leadership doesn't matter. Right? So that presents to us one of the first fundamental truths that we're going to wrap our brains around, and that is that just because you work in a hierarchy does not mean that you're a team. Hierarchy comes naturally, teamwork does not. And just because you have individuals on the team or within the organization that tend to be more dominant personalities does not make them leaders. Dominance is not the same as leadership. And then we have the reverse side of the hierarchy problem. The opposite of dominance is subordination, or which sometimes presents itself in the form of timidity. In other words, I know my place. I don't want to upset anybody. I'm gonna sit back here and I'm gonna let those people be dominant, and I'm gonna subordinate myself and stay out of trouble. Don't rock the boat, right? Well, just because you are a subordinator does not mean that you're an effective contributor. And so this hierarchy problem actually exists on both sides, and something that you'll find interesting that I'll share with you, and this is I've really thought a lot about this over the years based upon my own experience in organizational leadership and also working with people as a coach, that there's an ongoing fundamental problem in the workforce in many organizations that are out there across the United States, in which people with superiority complexes in positions of leadership are a huge problem. Okay. There is so much head nodding going on right now that there's actually a breeze that's coming up towards the front of the room here. Okay. But I want you to reflect on something. I can make a credible argument that the bigger problem is instead of reflexive dominance or superiority complexes, the bigger problem is inferiority complexes. Because in the presence of a bunch of individuals that are very quick and reflexive to subordinate themselves and play the inferior role, what they do is they clear the path for people that have a tendency towards dominance to amplify or feed their superiority complex. So this hierarchical behavior is not just about dominance or superiority, it's also problematic on the other side. Okay, so in The New Superior, I write about this principle called equals in the moment, that when we are trying to collaborate and communicate, we've got to be present with each other as equals in this. Now, that doesn't mean that we're ignoring our rank, right? But even if you look at the military, right, It could be in a tactical situation or in combat. Yeah, you may have your superior officers, right? The people that call the shots. But when you're working together, you all have the same mission, and the mission is more important than any one of you as individuals. And that's what that means to sort of be an equal in the moment. There's a time and place to use your rank. Okay? And that's when you have to make decisions that are reserved for somebody at your level of the organizational structure, right? There's a place for that. But for example, when you're just passing somebody in the hallway in the morning, your rank doesn't matter. But for some people it does. And they're the problem. So we have to keep our hierarchical behaviors in check. And that's our goal. Now I want to add talk a little bit about, I mentioned earlier that I got into management pretty early. I was 30 years old. I became a laboratory director up in Chicago. I had a staff of about 15 people. My director retired unexpectedly, and I was tapped to lead the laboratory. And I can tell you, even though I thought I was ready for it, I had no clue the amount of learning and growing and maturing I was going to have to do over the next 5 to 10 years. And that never stops, right? You're always learning, you're always maturing, always developing. But I go back to those early days when I first got into management, and I think to myself, what is it that I wish somebody had taught me? In other words, what message could somebody have shared with me in those early moments when I first became a manager that would have really helped me get out of my own way and be more effective? And I want to share those 3 things with you. And this will be really helpful to those of you that are new to the responsibilities of management, and certainly those of you that are in what we would call the leadership pipeline. In other words, there's most likely going to come a day when you're going to enter or take on the responsibilities of management. So the first thing is, I wish somebody had taught me that you cannot manage people. What an interesting thing to say in a class for management, that you can't manage people. But in fact, it is true. Remember at the start of the workshop this morning, I mentioned to you that you all made a choice to be here, right? Even if you were given a direct order by a boss with a huge superiority complex, even one that is abusive, you will go to this class or you're going to be fired at the end of the week, right? You still made the choice to come here. You managed yourself. You recognized, you did that calculation that we talked about, that the benefits of following the order outweigh the benefits of not following the order, but it was your choice. You managed yourself. So that's truth number 1, is that we have to disabuse ourselves of this rather silly idea that in today's age, where people are so empowered with knowledge and they have such an opportunity to learn and develop skills and to exercise autonomy in their personal lives and careers, that we would confuse ourselves with this idea that we can go around managing people. You cannot manage people. People manage themselves, just like every single one of us in this room does. We all manage ourselves. So that invites the second lesson, which is you must influence people, because that's our job if you're in a position of leadership or management, by focusing not on managing people, but on optimizing the conditions in which they work. Because if we optimize the conditions in which they work, then they will become more effective at managing themselves. And so as people in positions of management that are representing our organization, right, and sort of overseeing and facilitating that partnership that we talked about, then that relationship between the employee and the organization is going to be healthier. We want to create the conditions. So what I'm asking you to do here at the outset is to let go of this notion that your job is to manage people, but instead start reflecting on the conditions in which your people are working. And in what ways do the conditions perhaps adversely impact the way that your people are functioning, the way that the way that they behave, the way that they perform, the way that they interact with each other. And in what ways are the conditions positive? And usually it's a combination of the two. And so what we're always trying to do is we're trying to optimize those conditions, make those conditions as positive as possible. Remember that culture is a verb. Culture is something that we do. And what you're trying to do is optimize those conditions. The last of these three is a little bit more sentimentally valuable to me because it was something that I was really not good at doing until later in my management career, and when I realized how many lost opportunities I experienced because I didn't do this, okay? And that is to seek out the perspectives of other people that you trust when the challenges are high. Now, let me give you an example of what I mean by this, so this makes a little bit more sense. So what is this at the bottom of the screen? It's a level, right? I'm sure many of you have at your home, your house, your apartment, your condo, wherever you live, that you have hung up a mirror or a picture on the wall, right? And so I've got this picture that I want to hang up. I've got my nail and I've got a hammer. And so I find the spot on the wall where I want to hang it up. I take my nail, I tap the nail in, I come over, grab my picture, I hang it on the wall. And then what's the first thing I do after I hang up the picture? Say it again? Okay. How do I do that? But what do I do? Okay. I step back away from the wall, right? And the reason that I do that is because when I'm up close to the picture, I don't have the perspective. I can't step back and see the frame of the picture and its orientation as it compares to the floor and the ceiling. So I come back, I say, okay, it's tilted a little bit, so I go back up to the picture, I straighten it out, I step back again to get that fuller perspective to the point that I can see that the picture is level. I don't need a level to hang a picture. We can eyeball it, as it's said, right? Well, this is what happens when you're dealing with human beings. When you're a manager, when you're a leader, you're dealing with people. And as all of you know, because you shared some of these sentiments when we were doing our introductions, and that is that people are challenging. Well, guess what? Each and every one of us in this room is challenging, right? We've got opinions, we've got life experience, we have triggers, we have frustrations, we have things that irritate us, we have preferences. Humans are complicated. And so when you bring a bunch of human beings together on a team, those dynamics become complicated. Well, what happens is that if you're like me, and I feel like we've got a lot of really conscientious, thoughtful people in this room, that if you're having struggles, a really difficult problem that deals with your people, you're going to experience some emotions with that. It's tough. You may struggle to sleep at night if it's a really challenging problem, right? Well, here's the thing, is that what you can't do is when these problems arise, you can't step away from them the way that you could the picture. You can't be in a meeting with one of your employees and stand up and go, I got to get out of here for 3 days because I'm really freaked out right now. Right? That wouldn't drum up trust in you as a manager, right? But what you can do is you can go talk to people that you trust. They don't even have to be in your organization. It can be a friend, it can be a family member, right? In some instances, people hire coaches or therapists, counselors, right? Anytime you are in your own way, that you are trying to step back and take in a bigger perspective on what is going on, you are doing yourself and your team a huge, huge favor. I was a miserable failure at doing that because I took too much pride, and this was some of my own maturity at the time. I took too much pride in trying to prove to people that I could do it myself. And I have a feeling there's a lot of you in this room that can identify with that, right? Look, there's nothing wrong with wanting to be good at what you do, right? And to demonstrate competence. But we have to ask for help. We are really not designed as human beings to deal with the issues that we have to deal with when we're in positions of management. Like, we've got to get help. It can be official help through HR or something like that, or through a manager, but it could also be informal help through friends and your professional network.